data engineer gets 23 violation notices in 6 months. His white neighbor across the street, 0. Same street.
Just a little.
Same lawn standards.
I almost got
Same
it.
bins. He's an
Dad,
AI
stop.
bias expert.
It's okay.
So he runs the numbers. 3. 7 times.
Don't tell
That's how
me
much more
I'm
likely the algorithm
overthinking.
flags homes of color. Then he finds what the HOA president's brother built. Then he finds what she sold. Your violation data. To your insurance company. To your mortgage lender. The algorithm wasn't just watching you. It was charging you for what it saw. The algorithm. They called it objective. He had 3 papers that said otherwise. The 23rd violation notice arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by the same automated system that had delivered the previous 22, a PDF attachment to an email sent at 6:47 a.m., before Yusuf Hassan had finished his first cup of coffee, generated by a platform called Community Guard Pro and bearing the Pinecrest Village's HOA logo in the upper left corner. This one cited the position of his recycling bin. Yusuf read it at his kitchen table while his daughters ate breakfast, Hannah, 11, and Layla, 8, both in the focused silence of children who had learned that their father read his morning emails with the attention of a man who was tracking something. He had been tracking something since the 4th notice, when the pattern had become visible enough to name. By the 23rd, he had a spreadsheet. He set down his phone and looked at the recycling bin through the kitchen window. It was in the same position it had been for 6 months, against the side of the garage, at the approved setback distance from the property line, exactly where the HOA's move-in welcome packet had suggested placing it. He photographed the bin, time-stamped, and added it to a folder on his laptop labeled PV documentation. Then he helped Hannah find her math homework and drove both daughters to school and came home and opened the spreadsheet. 23 notices. 6 months. His address, 14 Pinecrest Lane, the house he had bought in April after the divorce was final, chosen because the school district was good and the commute was manageable and the neighborhood looked, from the outside, like the kind of place where 2 girls could grow up with enough space and enough quiet to become who they were going to be. His neighbor directly across the street, a man named Greg Hollister, 50s, whose lawn was consistently less maintained than Yusuf's, whose bins were routinely left at the curb past the approved retrieval window, whose fence had a section of visibly warped boards that had been warped since June, had received, as far as Yusuf could determine from their occasional conversations, 0 notices. Yusuf was 44 years old. He was a data engineer who spent his professional life building systems that identified patterns in large datasets, and then, increasingly, in the past 5 years, auditing those systems for the patterns they produced unintentionally. Algorithmic bias was his specific area. He had published 3 papers on it. He had testified before the Colorado legislature about it once. He was also black, Somali American, Muslim, and a single father, and he had been navigating the intersection of those categories in American professional and residential life long enough to know that the question "is this random or is this a pattern" was never as simple as it appeared, and that the answer almost always depended on what data you had access to and how carefully you looked at it. He looked carefully. It was, in the most literal sense, his job. He opened a new tab and began pulling the public data that Community Guard Pro made available to HOA members through the community portal, the violation log, anonymized by address but not by location, which was the specific oversight of a system designed by people who understood data less well than they believed they did. He began mapping. He had moved to Pinecrest Villages knowing it would require adjustment, not to the neighborhood itself, which was good in the ways that had mattered to his daughters' lives, but to the social temperature of a community that had been, until recently, almost entirely white, and that was now, through the gradual process of Denver's housing market shifting, becoming something else. He had understood this before signing the purchase agreement. He had grown up in Minneapolis, the son of Somali refugees who had arrived in 1992 and had spent 30 years building a life that was, by any external measure, successful and, by any honest internal measure, conducted in a society that communicated its incomplete welcome in the accumulated small ways that didn't make reports but made lives. His father had been a civil engineer, precise, methodical, a man who documented everything because he had learned early that documentation was the only argument that every room eventually had to acknowledge. His mother had been a nurse, then a nursing instructor, navigating 30 years of a healthcare system not designed for her and communicating this navigation to her children not as complaint but as methodology. Yusuf had inherited the methodology. He had also inherited the combination of patience and precision that made him good at work other people found tedious, the work of reading a system until you understood what it was actually doing, as opposed to what it said it was doing. He had been reading systems of various kinds for 20 years. He was reading this one now, The Community Guard Pro violation log covered 18 months, since the system had been installed in Pinecrest Villages the previous April, as part of what the HOA newsletter had called a modernization initiative overseen by the board president, Patricia Holt, who had been running Pinecrest Villages for 8 years and who had, Yusuf had established, a background in property management and a relationship with the company that had sold the HOA the system. He spent 4 evenings with the violation log. He built a map of every violation issued in the 18-month period, color-coded by address, layered over the community's demographic data assembled from public records, the county assessor's files, the census tract data, the home purchase records that were public by law. The map was not subtle. Properties occupied by residents of color had received violations at a rate 3.7 times higher than comparable properties occupied by white residents, controlling for lot size, property age, and proximity to common areas. The disparity was consistent across all violation categories: landscaping, exterior maintenance, vehicle placement, refuse management. It was not explained by any property characteristic he could identify. It was explained by the identity of the residents. He called Dr. Sarah Osei. Sarah was 51, a professor of computer science at the University of Denver who had spent 20 years studying algorithmic bias and automated decision systems. She was also the kind of scientist who said what she found regardless of whether it was convenient. "Send me the data," she said. He sent it. She called back in 6 days. "The pattern is real," she said. "I ran 4 analytical approaches. The disparity is statistically significant at p less than 0.001 across all of them. The system is producing racially disparate outcomes at a rate not explicable by random variation or any property characteristic in your dataset. Can you tell me why?" "Yes," she said. Community Guard Pro uses a machine learning model for violation detection. It processes camera imagery, drone photography, and reported data to identify potential violations. That model was trained on historical data from the company's existing client HOAs. She paused. "I found the training methodology in a 2021 patent filing. Their client HOAs were predominantly white, predominantly high income, predominantly older communities with specific historical enforcement patterns. The model learned what a violation looked like from those communities," Yusuf said. "Exactly. It learned what deviation from the norm looked like. When applied to a community that is more diverse than its training set, it treats the diversity itself as deviation from the baseline. It flags what is different from what it has learned to expect. And what is different, statistically, is often the presence of residents of color." She paused. "The model isn't explicitly racist. It has no race variable, but it encodes the racial preferences of the communities that generated its training data, and when applied to a different demographic context, those preferences produce disparate impact." "So the bias travels," Yusuf said. "The bias travels," Sarah confirmed. "And any data scientist who read the 2021 patent filing would understand the risk. Whether someone read it and disclosed it to their clients, or read it and said nothing, I can't tell you from here." "I can find out," Yusuf said. He found it through public records, which were, as always, more informative than the people filing them intended. Community Guard Pro was a product of Meridian Community Technologies, founded in 2019 by a man named Derek Holt, who had left a property management firm to start the company. Derek Holt. Patricia Holt. He checked. Siblings. He added this to the documentation folder. He also found, in Meridian Community Technologies Terms of Service, a contract to which the HOA was a party, accessible to members under Colorado's HOA Transparency Statute, a data sharing provision buried in Section 14, subsection C. It stated that anonymized violation data could be shared with third-party partners for the purpose of property risk assessment, insurance underwriting, and mortgage lending analysis. Yusuf read it 3 times. A property with a high violation rate, in the model's framework, was a higher risk property. Higher risk properties received higher insurance premiums and less favorable mortgage terms. The residents receiving disproportionate violations, who were, as Sarah had shown, disproportionately residents of color, were therefore also receiving disproportionate financial harm through their insurance and mortgage costs. The system was not merely enforcing unfairly. It was converting unfair enforcement into a commercial product that made the people being overflagged pay more for the right to own their homes. He called Rachel Goldstein, a civil rights attorney who had handled HOA law for 16 years and who answered on the second ring. "Send me the folder," she said. He sent it. She called back the next morning. "Fair Housing Act disparate impact violation, clear and documented," she said. The data sharing provision creates additional liability because the financial harm from the insurance and lending discrimination compounds the enforcement harm. And the family relationship, HOA president purchasing a system from her brother's company without disclosing it to the membership, is breach of fiduciary duty. Potentially fraud, depending on what the investigation shows she knew about the bias. The bias risk is in the 2021 patent filing, Yusuf said. The system was sold to Pinecrest Villages in 2022. Any due diligence review would have surfaced the methodology. Get the board meeting minutes from the purchase period, Rachel said. That's where we find out what she knew. The minutes arrived on a Friday. Yusuf read them that evening at the kitchen table while Hannah and Layla finished their homework. The minutes from the meeting at which Community Guard Pro had been approved described Patricia Holt presenting the system as a modernization of enforcement practices to ensure consistent, objective, and unbiased application of community standards. The word unbiased appeared twice. The vote was 4-1. The dissenting vote was a board member named Claudette Morrison. The minutes did not reflect any disclosure of the relationship between Patricia Holt and Derek Holt. He called Claudette Morrison the next morning. She was 63, black, a retired city planner who had lived in Pinecrest Villages for 11 years. She answered before the second ring. I voted against it, she said, before he had finished explaining. I've been waiting for someone to call. They met at her kitchen table on Sunday afternoon. She had her own notes from the March meeting, the handwritten precision of a city planner who had documented public meetings for 30 years. I asked who had audited the system for bias, Claudette said. Patricia said the company had conducted internal validation showing the system was objective. I asked whether the validation was independent. She said the board would look into it. She looked at her notes. The board never looked into it. She turned a page. I also asked whether members had been informed about the data sharing provision. She said it was in the terms of service. The terms of service is 47 pages. The data sharing provision is in section 14, subsection C. It is not summarized anywhere in the member-facing materials. What happened when you raised those concerns? Yusuf asked. Gary Weiss, the treasurer, said that sometimes experienced professionals overthought these things, and that the board had access to technical expertise that individual members might not. She set down her notes. Gary Weiss has been on the board for 6 years. His background is retail management. He told a former city planner with 30 years of public administration experience that she was overthinking the governance implications of an automated decision system. And Patricia? Patricia said I was working against community interests. She held Yusuf's eyes. Working against community interests. For asking whether a system described as objective had been independently audited for objectivity. Yusuf wrote this down verbatim. He thought about what Gary Weiss had done, the mechanism of it, the use of professional dismissal as governance control, the suggestion that asking careful questions about a system's bias was a form of inexperience rather than a form of competence. He had been on the receiving end of that mechanism throughout his career, in corporate presentations where his concerns about training data provenance were described as getting into the weeds, in tech meetings where his questions about disparate impact were characterized as overthinking. It was a specific instrument. It was used on specific people. The specificity was not accidental. What else do you have? He asked. 11 years of notes, she said. Start from the beginning or the end? The beginning, he said. He also needed comparison data. He called his neighbor directly across the street, not Greg Hollister, whose conversation would be brief and circular, but David Kowalski, 47, a white software architect who had lived in Pinecrest Villages for 4 years and who had received, by his own account, 3 violation notices total. David reviewed Yusuf's request and said yes without hesitation. I've been watching this for 6 months, he said. I didn't know what to do about it. You clearly do. Can I use your violation record as a comparison case? Use everything I have, David said. He paused. My neighbor, the older gentleman 2 doors down, Mr. Osei, he told me he'd received 16 notices in 8 months. I thought maybe he was just, I don't know what I thought. He stopped. I should have called someone. You're saying something now, Yusuf said. He also spoke to his neighbor on the left, Amara Diop, 37, a French teacher who had moved to Pinecrest Villages 2 years ago. Amara was Senegalese American, Muslim, wore hijab, and had received 19 violation notices. Her neighbor on the other side, a white retiree named Helen, had received 2. I thought it was me, Amara said. I kept rereading the CC&Rs. I kept measuring my garbage cans from the property line. I kept photographing my lawn after mowing. She was quiet for a moment. Do you know how much time I spent doing that? Every week, photographing my lawn to prove it was within specifications, because I had received so many notices I no longer trusted my own judgment. How many hours, total? Yusuf asked. She thought about it carefully, in the manner of someone who had just been asked to count something they had not previously thought to count. 2 years. Maybe 100 hours. Maybe more. I want that number in the record, Yusuf said. Why? Because 100 hours is concrete, he said. When you tell someone the algorithm produced a 3.7x disparity, they can argue about methodology. When you tell them a French teacher spent 100 hours photographing her lawn to prove to a machine that she was compliant, that's not a statistic. That's a person. That's what the statistic meant for one person in 2 years. Amara looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I also want to tell you something that isn't about the algorithm. He waited. When I first got the notices, I called the HOA office. I spoke to Patricia Holt. She was professional, pleasant. She explained the system, said she hoped I was settling in well. Amara paused. And then at the end of the call, almost as an aside, she said that Pinecrest Villages had a very particular character that the community had worked hard to develop, and that she hoped I would come to appreciate it. A very particular character, Yusuf said. I know what that phrase means. I've been hearing it in different forms since I moved to America 12 years ago. She met his eyes. I didn't say anything then because I had a feeling and a phrase and no evidence. Now I have evidence. Now I can say what I heard and what it meant. Put it in writing, Yusuf said. Exactly what she said and when. Sign it. Amara nodded. I already drafted it this morning, she said. I thought you'd ask. He found Bernard Osei, 68, Ghanaian American, the older gentleman 2 doors from David Kowalski, threw a note left in his mailbox the week before the community meeting. Bernard called that evening. 16 notices in 8 months, Bernard said. After the 8th one, I called my insurance company to ask about my renewal premium. It had increased by $340 from the previous year. A pause. They said it was based on a property risk score. They wouldn't tell me what the score was based on. Yusuf was quiet for a moment. Did you ask for documentation of the risk assessment? I asked, Bernard said. They said it was proprietary. He paused. I thought it was just insurance. I thought my property was the problem. I had someone come and look at the foundation, the roof, the drainage, everything came back fine. His voice had the particular flatness of a man who had spent months in the wrong direction looking for an answer. It wasn't the property. No, Yusuf said. It wasn't the property. It was the notices, Bernard said. The notices fed a risk score that fed a premium increase, Yusuf said. The data sharing provision in the terms of service. Section 14, subsection C, your violation data was sold to your insurance company. Bernard was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was steady in the way of a man who had been steady for 68 years and was going to continue being steady regardless of what he was told. My violation data, he said. That they generated. By sending me 16 notices I didn't deserve. They generated the data and sold it. To raise my premiums. Yes, Yusuf said. And they did this to other people. Yes, Yusuf said. I want to be at the meeting, Bernard said. Whatever meeting you're organizing. I want to be there and I want to say this. You'll be there, Yusuf said. And you'll say it. Patricia Holt called him on a Wednesday morning, the day after Yusuf filed his formal request for a special membership meeting. She was pleasant in the way of someone for whom pleasantness was a professional instrument. She said she understood he had been speaking with community members about the enforcement system and that she wanted to reach out directly. I'd be happy to arrange a demonstration for you, she said. Given your technical background, I'm sure you'd appreciate the sophistication of the approach. I've read the patent filing, Yusuf said. The 2021 methodology document. I understand the approach. The system has been validated internally by Meridian Community Technologies, Yusuf said. Which is owned by your brother. The board was not informed of that relationship when the purchase was approved. The data sharing provision was not disclosed in member-facing materials. He paused. My statistical analysis of the violation log shows properties occupied by residents of color receiving violations at 3.7 times the rate of comparable properties occupied by white residents. Dr. Sarah Osei at the University of Denver has validated the analysis. A pause. Longer than the previous ones. The system is race neutral, Patricia said, with a shift in register, from professional warmth towards something more careful. It does not use demographic data. Any differences in violation rates reflect differences in actual property conditions. A system doesn't need a race variable to produce racially disparate outcomes, Yusuf said. It needs training data that carries racial patterns. I've published 3 papers on this specific mechanism. The Colorado legislature has heard my testimony about it. It is not a contested point in the field. He paused. I'm also calling because I wanted you to know what the community meeting will cover. The statistical analysis, the patent methodology, the family relationship that wasn't disclosed, the data sharing provision, and the financial harm to specific residents, including a $340 premium increase for one resident whose violation data was sold to his insurance company. He paused. I thought you deserved to know before the meeting. A silence. I'll be at the meeting, she said. I know, Yusuf said. After he hung up, he went to the park with his daughters. He pushed Layla on the swings while Hannah read on a bench nearby. Layla screamed with the joy of height. He thought about what this place was supposed to feel like, this specific ease, this ordinary afternoon, this absence of the calculation that the notices had imposed. The calculation of whether your lawn would be flagged, whether your bin was at the precisely correct distance, whether you were compliant enough to exist in your own neighborhood without receiving automated messages about it before your coffee was finished. That was the specific erosion. Not the notices themselves, but what they trained you to do, to survey yourself constantly, to measure yourself against a standard that moved, to never be quite certain that your home was acceptable in the way that other people's homes were simply, unquestionably acceptable. He pushed Layla higher. She screamed louder. He went home and finished the presentation. He also made one more call, on the Thursday before the meeting, to a man he had been putting off. James Park, no relation to the other Parks in his notes, was 54, Korean American, a former corporate attorney who had lived in Pinecrest Villages for 7 years and who had, Yusuf had learned from Claudette's notes, a daughter with multiple sclerosis who used a wheelchair part-time and who visited her father in Pinecrest Villages on alternate weekends. James answered on the third ring and listened to the summary without interrupting. Tell me about the accessibility piece, he said, when Yusuf finished. That's what I wanted to ask you about, Yusuf said. I know your daughter visits. I know from the permit records that you submitted a modification request 18 months ago, an exterior threshold ramp at the front entrance. It was denied. Aesthetic inconsistency, James said. The Fair Housing Act protects accessibility modifications, Yusuf said. The denial was a violation. But I also want to understand whether the community guard system played a role. Did the modification denial come through the automated system or through the board directly? The automated system flagged the ramp installation as an unauthorized exterior modification, James said. The flag triggered a board review. Patricia Holt personally signed the denial. A pause. My daughter has been using the side entrance through the garage for 18 months. It has a 4-inch step she has to navigate. On a bad MS day, Yusuf said. On any day, James said. But yes. On a bad day it's genuinely dangerous. He was quiet for a moment. I submitted a second application 8 months ago. That one was denied by the automated system before it even reached board review. The system flagged it as a resubmission of a previously denied modification and closed it automatically. So the algorithm denied your daughter's accessibility modification, Yusuf said. The algorithm denied my daughter's right to enter my house through the front door, James said. Because it had been trained to treat exterior modifications as violations, and it treated a fair housing protected accommodation the same way it treated an unapproved fence. He paused. Is that a bug or a feature? It's a training data problem, Yusuf said. The model learned to flag exterior modifications as violations because that's what the training communities flagged. It wasn't taught to distinguish between modifications that are legally protected and those that aren't. That distinction requires context the model wasn't given. And whose responsibility is it to give the model that context? The companies, Yusuf said. And the boards, when they approved a system without auditing its legal compliance. James was quiet for a moment. I want to bring my daughter to the meeting, he said, if that's appropriate. It's appropriate, Yusuf said. Will she come? She's been wanting to do something about this for 8 months, James said. I'm the one who kept saying wait. The special membership meeting was on a Thursday evening in November, at the Jefferson Park Recreation Center. 71 residents attended. Yusuf had prepared it with the care he brought to technical presentations, organized around the principle that correctness without comprehensibility was not useful, that the value of a finding depended entirely on whether the people who needed to act on it could understand it. Sarah Osei presented first. She explained the statistical analysis with 3 analogies, each simpler than the last, until the room understood the mechanism of algorithmic bias without needing to understand machine learning. The model learned from communities that enforced in specific ways, against specific backgrounds, she said. It learned what deviation from the norm looked like. When applied to Pinecrest Villages, a community more diverse than its training set, it treated diversity itself as deviation. It flagged what was different from what it had learned to expect. And what was different, statistically, was often the presence of residents of color. She paused. The model has no race variable. It doesn't know what race is. But it learned from communities whose enforcement patterns were shaped by race, and it applied those patterns here. That is textbook disparate impact, and it is prohibited by the Fair Housing Act regardless of intent. The room held this quietly. Yusuf presented second. He walked through the documentation, the violation log, the Meridian Community Technologies corporate filings, the family relationship, the board meeting minutes. He explained the data sharing provision slowly, because it was the piece the room needed to understand as financial harm, not just governance failure. The violation data generated by this system, including the data from the 3.7 times disparity, has been sold to insurance companies and mortgage lenders as a property risk signal, he said. A property that receives a high number of violations is flagged as higher risk. Higher risk properties receive higher insurance premiums and less favorable lending terms. He paused. One of your neighbors, Bernard Osei, who has lived here for 9 years, received 16 violation notices in 8 months. His annual insurance premium increased by $340 at his next renewal. His insurance company cited his property risk score. The risk score was fed by violation data. The violation data was generated by a system that overflags properties and homes occupied by residents of color by a factor of 3.7. He let that sit. He paid $340 more for his insurance because of violations he didn't deserve, generated by a biased algorithm, sold to his insurance company without his knowledge, under a provision buried in page 31 of a 47-page terms of service that was never summarized in any member-facing material. Bernard Osei raised his hand from the 5th row. I want to confirm what Mr. Hassan just said, he said. Not as a legal claim, as a fact. $340. I called my insurance company. I asked about my score. They said it was proprietary. He looked at the room. I spent 3 months having my foundation and roof and drainage inspected because I thought something was wrong with my property. Nothing was wrong with my property. The violation data was wrong. And I paid for it. The room's quality shifted, from the silence of people understanding a harm done to others to the silence of people understanding a harm done to them. James Park raised his hand. He was in the 3rd row. His daughter, Mia Park, 29, who used a wheelchair part-time due to multiple sclerosis, was beside him. My name is James Park, he said. I live at 28 Pinecrest Lane. My daughter Mia visits me on alternate weekends. He paused. 18 months ago, I submitted a modification request for a front entrance ramp under the Fair Housing Act. The automated system flagged it as an unauthorized exterior modification. The board denied it. I submitted a second application 8 months ago. The automated system rejected it automatically as a resubmission of a previously denied modification, before it reached board review. He looked at the room. My daughter has been using the garage entrance for 18 months. It has a 4-inch step she has to navigate every time she visits her father. Mia Park spoke without raising her hand. I want to say something, she said, and the room gave her the silence she needed. My father kept telling me to wait. That he was working on it. That there was a process. She paused. I want people to understand what waiting for the process means for someone with a progressive condition. My MS is not stable. What I can do today is not what I could do 18 months ago, and what I can do today is not what I'll be able to do in 18 months. The process that took 18 months didn't pause while I waited. I waited. The process ran. My condition changed. She looked at the room. The garage step isn't just an inconvenience. It's a risk. And every time I navigate it, I'm aware that someone decided that their aesthetic standards were more important than my safety. The room was still in a different way than it had been still before. Amara Diop raised her hand. I want to add one thing to what Dr. Osei and Mr. Hassan presented, she said. Something that isn't algorithmic. She told the room about Patricia Holt's phone call, the phrase very particular character, calmly, in the measured register of someone who had been thinking about how to say this for a long time. I know what that phrase means. I've been hearing versions of it since I moved to America 12 years ago. I am telling you what she said and what I understood it to mean, because it belongs in the record alongside the statistics. Claudette Morrison stood from the second row. I voted against this system in March of last year, she said. I asked whether it had been independently audited for bias. I asked whether members had been informed about the data sharing provision. I was told I was being obstructionist. Gary Weiss told me that experienced professionals sometimes overthought these things. She looked at the board table. I have 30 years of public administration experience. I understand governance systems. When I raised concerns about this system, I was told my concerns reflected insufficient sophistication. She looked at the room. The analysis presented tonight was conducted by a data engineer with 20 years of algorithmic bias experience and a computer science professor who has published extensively in this field. My concerns reflected exactly the sophistication required to identify what that analysis has documented. I want that acknowledged. Not for me, for the next person who raises a careful question in this room and is told they're overthinking. Patricia Holt was in the back row. She had the composed expression of someone who had committed to composure as the only remaining option. Mrs. Holt, Yusuf said. The board minutes from the March meeting don't reflect any disclosure of your family relationship with Meridian Community Technologies. Was that relationship disclosed in any other form? Derek and I have a family relationship. The board was aware I had identified the vendor through a professional connection. A professional connection, Claudette said. You described your brother's company as a professional connection. Family members can have professional. Colorado HOA statute requires disclosure of conflicts of interest before votes, Rachel said from the side of the room. She introduced herself in 3 sentences. A board member with a familial relationship to a vendor whose contract is being voted on has a conflict that must be disclosed before the vote. The minutes don't reflect it. Do you have documentation showing disclosure in any other form? Patricia did not answer. The legal process has started, Rachel said. What happens next is up to the community. The vote of no confidence was 62-9. The motion to immediately suspend Community Guard Pro pending independent audit passed 68-3. Patricia Holt remained in her seat when the counts were announced. She did not perform composure, she simply held it, which was different, and which Yusuf noted because he had learned to read the difference. He gathered his materials and thought about what the evening had been, not triumph, which was always the wrong register for this kind of work, but something more like the specific satisfaction of a system being seen accurately. The algorithm had been doing what it was built to do, which was to encode a past and impose it on a present. Seeing it clearly was the first requirement for changing it. He drove home through the November night. He paid his sitter, checked on the girls, both asleep, both with the specific piece of children who had not yet learned to calculate whether their presence was acceptable, and went to his home office. He sat at the drafting table his father had given him when he started his first job. A heavy, careful piece of furniture that had moved with him through 4 apartments and 2 houses, because it was the kind of thing you kept when it had been given with meaning. His father had given it with a sentence: the work requires the posture of careful looking. Here is a table for looking carefully. He opened a new document. He had been thinking for 3 weeks about writing this up, not as a legal document but as a technical paper. A case study in algorithmic bias in residential HOA enforcement systems, with the statistical methodology documented fully enough that any data scientist in any community with a similar system could replicate the analysis. Could find what he had found, if they looked. He typed the title, Disparate Impact in Automated HOA Enforcement, a Case Study in Machine Learning Bias and Its Financial Consequences. He wrote the first sentence of the abstract. We present a case study of statistically significant racial disparate impact in an automated homeowners association enforcement system, with analysis of the training data provenance, bias propagation mechanism, and downstream financial consequences for affected residents, including documented insurance premium increases resulting from the commercial sale of biased violation data. He read the sentence. It was accurate. It was complete. He saved it and closed the laptop. He thought about the people in the room tonight, about Claudette's 30 years of notes, about Bernard Osei's 3 months of unnecessary property inspections, about James Park saying I kept telling her to wait, about Mia Park saying the process ran, my condition changed. About Amara Diop, who had spent 100 hours photographing her lawn and who had said, when he asked her to put the phrase in writing, I already drafted it this morning. I thought you'd ask. He thought about what his father had meant by careful looking, not just the technical kind, though the technical kind mattered. The human kind, the kind that saw Mia Park's changing condition and understood that a process measured in months was something different for a person whose body changed in months. The kind that heard Bernardo say describe 3 months of unnecessary inspections and understood that the specific harm was not just the money but the misdirection, the months of looking at the wrong thing while the right thing went unseen. The algorithm had not looked carefully. It had looked at pattern, at deviation from baseline, at the statistical signature of difference from what it had been trained to recognize as normal. It had not looked at the person navigating a garage step on an MS bad day. It had not looked at the teacher measuring her lawn every week. It had not looked at the man who had lived somewhere for 9 years and had been told, implicitly and systematically, that the place was not quite his. That was the work. Making those things visible. Naming them in the language that the rooms and the courts and the institutions eventually had to acknowledge. Not because naming was sufficient, it was not sufficient, it had never been sufficient, it was only the beginning of what was sufficient. But because the beginning had to exist before anything else could follow. He went to bed. In the morning, Hannah found her math homework without being asked. Layla decided she wanted oatmeal instead of cereal. Yusuf made coffee and looked at the recycling bin through the kitchen window, in its approved position, in the morning light, and did not check his email first. No notice arrived. He drank his coffee. He drove his daughters to school. He came home and opened the paper and began writing in earnest. The work continues, he thought. It always continues. But this morning, at least, it continued without the recycling bin. The Community Guard Pro system remained suspended pending independent audit. The audit, conducted by an independent data science firm, confirmed Dr. Osei's findings and identified 3 additional bias mechanisms in the model's feature set beyond those in Yusuf's original analysis. The civil litigation was filed in December. 11 plaintiff households, including Amara Diop, Bernard Osei, and the Park family. Claims included Fair Housing Act disparate impact violation, breach of fiduciary duty for the undisclosed conflict of interest, unauthorized commercial use of member data, and a separate fair housing violation for the denial of James Park's accessibility modification request. Meridian Community Technologies was named as co-defendant. Bernard Osei's insurance company, notified of the fair housing investigation by his attorney, reviewed his risk score and reversed the $340 premium increase. They did not voluntarily contact other policyholders in the same situation. Rachel filed a subpoena. Mia Park's front entrance ramp was approved by the emergency board within 10 days of the community meeting, the fastest board action in Pinecrest Village's recorded history. It was installed on a Saturday in December. James Park sent Yusuf a photograph. Yusuf printed it. The Colorado Attorney General's office opened an investigation in January into Community Guard Pro's data sharing practices across all 17 of its Colorado client HOAs. Yusuf was asked to serve as technical consultant. He accepted. Patricia Holt resigned from the HOA board in February, through her attorney, 2 paragraphs, personal reasons. Claudette Morrison was elected HOA president in March, the first contested election in Pinecrest Village's history. Her first act was to establish an independent oversight committee for any future automated enforcement systems, with authority to commission external audits before deployment and standing authority to suspend any system pending investigation. Derek Holt's company removed the data sharing provision from its terms of service in April, after the Attorney General's investigation became public. It issued no explanation. The paper, Disparate Impact in Automated HOA Enforcement, a case study in machine learning bias and its financial consequences, was accepted by the Journal of Artificial Intelligence Research in June. Co-authored by Yusuf Hassan and Dr. Sarah Osei. In the acknowledgments, the residents of Pinecrest Villages who documented their experiences. Particularly Amara Diop, who counted 100 hours and said, "Put it in the record." And Mia Park, who said, "The process ran. My condition changed." That sentence is in the paper. It belongs there. The litigation settled in September. Financial terms sealed. Non-financial terms not. Community Guard Pro was required to commission an independent bias audit of its training data and retrain its model under independent supervision before deploying to any new client. The audit would be published publicly. On a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year after the 23rd notice arrived, Yusuf had his coffee without checking his email first. He looked out the kitchen window at the recycling bin in its approved position. No alert. He thought about the paper, and about the people in it, and about the 17 other Colorado HOAs where the system had been running, and about the audits now underway, and about the next version of the mechanism that someone was building somewhere right now, in good faith or bad, with training data that carried someone's preferences about who belonged and who didn't. He thought, the work continues. He helped Layla find her math homework. He drove his daughters to school. He came home and opened the paper and kept writing.